The next day, her world changed forever. Cameras, investors, and a single sentence. You helped me when no one else did. What started as a small act of kindness became a chance to rebuild her dreams and prove that even without money, connections, or status, true character shines. A story of courage, betrayal, and rising through doubt with heart. Get ready. This one will inspire you deeply. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, and tell us where you're watching from. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness reveal the greatest truths about who we are. Rain fell in sheets against the tall windows of the Moonrise Bakery, creating watery veils that distorted the early morning light. Inside, Amara Chen methodically kneaded dough, her fingers working with practiced precision despite the early hour. The bakery was silent, except for the rhythmic sound of her hands on the soft, yielding surface and the persistent drumming of raindrops against glass. She paused, closing her eyes briefly, inhaling the comforting scent of yeast and flour that reminded her of childhood mornings in her grandmother's kitchen. At 32, Amara had spent most of her life in kitchens, first at her grandmother's side, then in culinary school before dropping out, and now at the Moonrise, where she arrived each morning at 4 to prepare the day's offering. The work was steady, but not her own. The recipes belonged to someone else. The dreams she'd once harbored of her own place had been carefully folded away, like delicate linens too precious to. Thunder rumbled in the distance as she shaped the dough into neat rolls, her movements automatic after years of repetition. Outside, the city was slowly awakening, silhouettes of early commuters passing by the storefront like ghosts in the rain. The bell above the door jingled as Marcus, the bakery owner, entered, shaking rainwater from his umbrella. "Morning, Amara. You're early again." "Just couldn't sleep," she replied, not mentioning the leak in her apartment ceiling that had kept her awake, or her brother Eli's late-night coughing that worried her more than she would admit. Marcus nodded, hanging his coat on the rack. "Listen, we've got extra inventory from yesterday. The distributor ordered wrong. Mind taking home some of the cinnamon rolls and sourdough? Hate to see it wasted." Amara thought of Eli, how his eyes would light up at the cinnamon roll. "Thanks, I appreciate it." By closing time, the rain had intensified. Amara gathered the paper bag of leftover bread, her worn canvas tote, and an umbrella that had seen better days. She pulled her jacket close against the chill and stepped out into the downpour. The streets were nearly empty now, most people having sought shelter from the relentless weather. The smell of cinnamon from the bag mingled with the scent of wet pavement as she waited for the light to change at the corner. That's when she noticed him, a figure huddled beneath the awning of a closed boutique across the street. Even from a distance, she could see he was soaked, a torn blanket pulled over hunched shoulders, offering little protection from the elements. The light changed. Most people would have walked on. Amara didn't. Something in the man's posture, the quiet dignity even in desperation, reminded her of her father in those final difficult months before he passed. Without hesitation, she crossed the street and approached him. Up close, she could see he was older than she'd initially thought, perhaps in his late 50s, with a weathered face and hands that trembled slightly from the cold. He didn't look up as she approached, didn't extend a hand for money, didn't make eye contact. He simply stared down at his shaking hands as if they belonged to someone else. Amara knelt beside him, the rain immediately soaking through her jeans. She gently placed the paper bag beside him, then, after a moment's consideration, propped her umbrella against the wall within his reach. "It's warm," she said simply, indicating the bag of bread. "The cinnamon rolls are really good." The man looked up then, blinking as if she might be a hallucination. His eyes were a startling clear blue, intelligent despite their weariness. He didn't speak, but something in his expression shifted. Recognition, perhaps, not of her specifically, but of the simple humanity in her gesture. Amara smiled once, then stood and walked away, immediately drenched as she left the protection of the awning. By the time she reached the bus stop, her clothes were soaked through, her dark hair plastered to her face. She didn't look back. That night, as she helped Eli with his homework at their small kitchen table, she didn't mention the encounter. Some kindnesses weren't meant to be displayed like medals. The apartment was cramped but clean, with faded photos of their parents on the walls and potted herbs on the windowsill, attempts to bring life into a space that sometimes felt too empty since their parents had gone. "These rolls are amazing," Eli said between bites, cinnamon sugar clinging to his upper lip. At 15, he was growing so fast she could hardly keep up, his wrists extending from sleeves that had fit perfectly just months ago. Save some for though she couldn't help smiling at him. "Can I be your taste tester when you open your own bakery?" he asked, the question innocent, but striking a tender spot. Of course, though the dream seemed further away than ever. Between rent increases and Eli's asthma med, her savings had dwindled to almost nothing. Sleep came fitfully that night, her mind drifting between concerns about the leak over her bed and wondering if the man had found somewhere dry to sleep. The next morning arrived overcast but mercifully dry. Amara followed her usual routine, out the door by 3:30 a.m., a quick walk to the bus stop, arriving at the bakery by 4:00 to start the day's preparations. She was so accustomed to the quiet solitude of early mornings that the unusual scene outside the moonrise stopped her in her tracks. A line of people stretched down the block, dozens of, some with cameras, others in business attire despite the early hour. A news van was parked across the street, a reporter speaking animatedly into a microphone. Through the bakery's front window, she could see Marcus engaged in conversation with several well-dressed individuals. Confused, Amara approached cautiously, wiping her suddenly damp palms on. Something had happened, something significant, and she had no idea what it could be. As she drew closer, she recognized one of the men speaking with Marcus, the weathered man from beneath the awning. Except now, he was clean-shaven, dressed in an impeccable charcoal suit, his silver hair neatly combed, his presence commanding the room. She hesitated at the threshold, suddenly unsure. The man turned, his gaze finding hers, and in that moment of recognition, his serious expression transformed into a genuine smile that reached his eyes. There she is, his voice resonant, nothing like what she'd have expected from the silent figure, the baker with the umbrella. Marcus looked between them, bewildered. Amara, do you know who this is? Before she could answer, the man stepped forward, extending his James Harrington, you helped me yesterday. You didn't know who I was, but I won't forget that. The name registered immediately. James Harrington, founder of Culinary Ventures International, one of the country's largest restaurant investment firms. His story was legendary in the food world, a chef who had lost everything in his 30s only to rebuild and create an empire that launched hundreds of successful restaurants. I didn't, Amara stammered, acutely aware of her worn clothes and the flour already dusting her. That's precisely why I'm here, Harrington, his blue eyes intent. For the past 2 weeks, I've been visiting cities anonymously, testing local compassion as part of a project to find leaders who see people, not profiles or opportunities. A stunned silence followed his words. The reporters outside pressed closer to the windows, sensing a story unfolding. I wasn't looking for charity, Harrington. I was looking for character, for someone who acts with kindness when they believe no one is watching. He turned to address the room at large. That's the foundation of my new initiative, the Breaking Bread program, a 6-month accelerator for aspiring food entrepreneurs with vision and integrity. He turned back to Amara. A spot has just opened. I'd like you to apply. She froze, her mind struggling to... Why me? His answer was simple. Because when you thought no one was watching, you were still kind. That tells me more about how you'd run a business than any resume ever could. Amara stood speechless, aware of the eyes upon her, of Marcus's astonished expression, of the cameras flashing outside. This moment felt unreal, a plot twist in someone else's story. Her thoughts raced to all the reasons she should decline, her failed attempt at a food cart through the double shifts she worked to support, her lack of formal culinary education or business. She had no right to be in a room with polished entrepreneurs and established chefs. Yet beneath those doubts, a long dormant spark flickered to life. The dream she'd carried since childhood of a place that served not just food, but belonging, where her grandmother's recipes could live on, where community meant more than commerce. She began, then swallowed hard. Yes, I'd like to apply. Harrington smiled, a genuine warmth in his expression. Excellent. We begin next Monday. As cameras flashed and reporters called questions, Amara felt the ground shift beneath her feet. The life she had carefully constructed, predictable, safe, if uninspiring, had just cracked open, revealing a path she had long ago convinced her was closed. She had no idea what lay ahead, only that tomorrow would be different from yesterday, and that perhaps was enough to begin. The Breaking Bread program headquarters occupied the top floor of a renovated warehouse in the city's arts district. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the skyline, while the interior featured an open-concept design with state-of-the-art test kitchens, conference rooms, and collaborative workspaces. Amara's first day in the program was overwhelming. Dressed in the nicest clothes she owned, black pants and a burgundy blouse she'd ironed 3 times that morning, she clutched her worn leather notebook as she stepped off the elevator. The space buzzed with activity as the other 19 participants networked with casual confidence. They all seemed to know each other already, exchanging business cards and discussing funding rounds. Several had brought assistants who took notes on tablets. One woman was being filmed by what appeared to be a personal documentary crew. Amara stood frozen until a cheerful young man with a clipboard approached. "Amara Chen, I'm Devon, Mr. Harrington's assistant. Let me show you around." As Devon guided her through the space, introducing her to staff and explaining the program structure, Amara tried to absorb the information while fighting the growing certainty that she didn't belong here. Everyone else had business plans and branding decks. She had a wrinkled notebook with sketches of a cafe that blended her grandmother's recipes with community meals for those in need. Each participant gets a workstation, Devon explained, leading her to a sleek desk. The program runs Monday through Thursday, with Fridays consultations. You'll have access to all facilities 24/7, including the test kitchen. He handed her a schedule. Tomorrow morning begins with introductions. Each person will present their concept in a 3-minute pitch. 3 minutes, Amara echoed, panic rising. She had never pitched anything in her life. Devon nodded, oblivious to her distress. Just the basics: your concept, target market, and what makes it unique. Nothing formal yet. As Devon continued the tour, Amara noticed a tall, impeccably dressed man watching her from across the room. He had sharp features, expertly styled dark hair, and an expression of barely concealed disdain. When their eyes met, he didn't look away, but rather intensified his scrutiny, as if evaluating and dismissing her in the same moment. "That's Lucas Blackwood," Devon whispered, following her gaze. "Former executive chef at Meridian. 3 James Beard nominations. His pop-up restaurants have waiting lists months long." Lucas raised an eyebrow before turning away to join a group of admirers, his dismissal complete. By the time Amara left that evening, her confidence had withered. On the bus ride home, she flipped through her notebook, the ideas that had once seemed meaningful now appearing childish and naive. Who was she to compete with award-winning chefs and business school graduates? Eli was waiting when she returned, homework spread across the kitchen table, his face eager for detail. "How was it? Did you meet famous chefs? What's your workstation like?" Seeing his excitement, Amara forced a smile. "It was amazing. The kitchens are incredible. I think I'm the only one without a business degree, though." "But you're the only one Mr. Harrington personally invited," Eli pointed out, his faith in her unwavering. "That means something." Later that night, after Eli had gone to bed, Amara sat at their small kitchen table preparing for tomorrow's pitch. The blank document on her laptop mocked her efforts. How could she distill her dreams into 3 minutes? How could she compete with people who had been planning this moment for years? She closed her eyes, picturing her grandmother's hands shaping dough, teaching her that food was memory made tangible. She remembered the community meals they would host in their small apartment, how her grandmother insisted on setting a beautiful table even when they had little, saying, "Dignity is served before the first bite." Slowly, Amara began to type, not a business plan but a story, her vision for a place that honored those lessons. Morning came too quickly. The program participants gathered in the main conference room, an intimidating space with tiered seating facing a presentation area. Harrington sat in the front row alongside 4 other judges, renowned chefs and investors who would be mentoring throughout the program. One by one, participants presented their concept: a molecular gastronomy restaurant focusing on sustainable seafood, a tech-forward ghost kitchen collective, a luxury food tour company. Each presentation featured sleek graphics and confident delivery. Lucas Blackwood's pitch was particularly impressive, describing a restaurant concept called Heritage that would combine traditional techniques with modern innovation. His slides showed architectural renderings of a stunning space with a central hearth. "In a world of constant distraction," he concluded smoothly, Heritage offers authentication. Through disconnection. No phones, no Wi-Fi, just exceptional food and genuine conversation. The judges nodded appreciatively. One wrote something down with an approving smile. When Amara's turn came, her hands trembled so badly she nearly dropped her notebook. Standing before the room, the faces before her blurred. She took a deep breath and began. "My grandmother arrived in this country with 2 suitcases and 17 recipes written on scraps of paper, her voice quiet but steady. She couldn't bring her furniture or her photograph, but she brought her flavors, the taste of home." She flipped through her notebook, showing hand-drawn sketches of a cafe with mismatched chairs and tables named after herbs. "I call it Remembrance. It's a place where food tells stories, where my grandmother's cinnamon bread shares space with recipes contributed by our community, where elderly volunteers teach young people to bake, creating connections across generations." Amara described how customers could write food memories on small cards to be displayed on the walls, how a portion of proceeds would fund community meals, how the cafe would host monthly dinners where everyone, regardless of ability to pay, would be served with the same dignity. My grandmother always said that breaking bread together is sacred. At Remembrance, we honor that by creating a table where everyone belongs. The room was silent when she finished. Without the polished slides and rehearsed delivery of the others, her presentation felt painfully inadequate. She returned to her seat, cheeks burning, unable to look at the judges. As the day progressed through workshops and group activities, Amara overheard Lucas speaking to 2 other participants near the coffee station. "She gave a rich guy a sandwich, and now she thinks she's the next Julia Child," he said with a dismissive laugh. This isn't a charity competition. The words stung, but a small part of Amara couldn't help but agree with him. What had she been thinking? This program wasn't meant for people like her. That evening, as participants networked over drinks, Amara slipped away early. On the bus ride home, she considered not returning. Eli would be disappointed, but wouldn't it be kinder to abandon this fantasy now, before she invested more hope in it? She was so absorbed in these thoughts that she almost missed her stop. As she hurried down the aisle, the bus driver, an elderly woman with kind eyes, said, "Don't forget your notebook, honey. Looks important." Amara thanked her, clutching the notebook to her chest. Outside, the night air was cool against her. She took the long way home, passing the spot where she had met Harrington just days ago. The corner looked ordinary now, no trace of the encounter that had changed everything. A block from her apartment, she paused outside a vacant storefront. It had been a bookshop once, but had stood empty for months. Through the dusty windows, she could just make out the outline of built-in shelves and a small counter. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine it transform. Warm lighting, the scent of cinnamon and cardamom, tables where strangers might become friends. The vision was so vivid it ached. At home, she found Eli asleep on the couch, textbooks spread around him. She covered him with a blanket, then sat beside him, watching the gentle rise and fall of his chest. How many nights had he waited up for her like this? How many times had he believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself? "I saw you today," a voice said from the darkness. Amara jumped, her heart racing until a figure stepped into the dim light from the window. James Harrington, looking out of place in their modest apartment. "Mr. Harrington, how did you—" "Devon drove me. I hope you don't mind the intrusion, but you left before I could speak with you." He gestured to the chair across from her. "May I?" Still stunned, Amara nodded. Harrington sat, his gaze traveling over the small apartment, the faded wallpaper, the water stain on the ceiling, the family photos. "You're wondering if you belong in the program. Not a question, but a statement of fact." Amara looked down at her hands. Everyone else seems so prepared. They have business plans and investors already interested. I have sketches and stories. "Do you know why I started this program?" Harrington, his tone conversation. She shook her head. 25 years ago, I lost everything. My restaurant, my home, my marriage. One night, I found myself sitting on a park bench with nowhere to go. His expression grew distant with memory. A woman passing by offered me half her sandwich. Just that. No questions, no judgment. That moment of dignity when I felt I had none. It changed something in. He leaned forward, his gaze intent. "I built my company on the belief that the greatest leaders in the culinary world aren't just talented chefs or savvy business people. They're individuals who understand that food is about connection, about seeing people. But I failed before," Amara admitted quietly. "I tried to start a food cart 3 years ago. It lasted 6 months before I had to sell everything to pay medical bills when Eli got pneumonia. I filed for bankruptcy twice before I succeeded," Harrington replied. "Failure isn't disqualifying, it's educational." He stood, moving to the window. "Your presentation today was the only one that made me hungry. The only one that reminded me why I love food in the first place." He turned back to her. "You do belong in this program, Ms. Chen. The question is, do you believe you do?" After Harrington left, Amara sat in the quiet apartment, his words echoing in. Outside, the city hummed with late-night energy. Inside, something shifted. Not confidence exactly, but resolution. A decision to see this through, regardless of the outcome. The next morning, she arrived at the program early, before most participants. In the empty test kitchen, she tied on an apron and began to work, losing herself in the familiar rhythm of measuring, mixing, kneading. By the time others began to arrive, the kitchen was filled with the aroma of cinnamon and ginger. Devon entered, sniffing appreciative. "What is that? It smells amazing." "My grandmother's cinnamon rolls," Amara said, sliding a tray from the oven. "With a cardamom Would you like one? Throughout the morning, participants and staff drifted into the kitchen, drawn by the scent. Amara offered each a warm roll, watching as they took their first bites, their expressions shifting from polite interest to genuine pleasure. One of the judges, a renowned pastry chef named Elise Winters, lingered longer than the others. "These remind me of something," she said, savoring a bite. "My grandfather's bakery in the countryside. He used to add just a touch of cardamom too." "Food is memory," Amara said simply. Elise studied her with new interest. "Yes, exactly that." As the weeks passed, Amara settled in, mornings at the program, afternoons helping Eli with schoolwork, evenings developing recipes and refining her concept. The notebooks multiplied, one for recipes, one for business strategies, one for design ideas. She absorbed everything the program offered, staying late to practice presentations, arriving early to test recipes. Slowly, her concept evolved from vague sketch to concrete plan. Remembrance would be small, just 30 seats, with a communal table at its center. The menu would change seasonally, but always feature her grandmother's cinnamon rolls and sourdough. Community meals would be held on Sunday evenings with a pay what you... Not everyone was supportive. Lucas and his circle maintained their distance, occasionally exchanging amused glances when she spoke in group sessions. Once, after a particularly difficult financial planning workshop, she overheard him say, "Some people are just meant to work for others." The comment burned, but Amara channeled her frustration into work. If she couldn't match his confidence or connections, she could outwork him. While others networked at industry events, she perfected recipes. While they discussed theory, she tested practice. The first major obstacle hit during the mid-program presentations. Each participant had 15 minutes to present their refined concept, complete with financial projections and marketing strategy. Amara had prepared meticulously, rehearsing her presentation for Eli so many times he could recite it with her. But standing before the judges and her peers, something went wrong. The words tangled, slides advanced too quickly, and when asked about her 5-year expansion plan, her mind went blank. She stumbled through, aware of the sympathetic winces from some, the barely concealed smirks from others. Afterward, she escaped to the stairwell, tears burning her eyes. The weight of the past weeks crashed down, the early mornings, late night, the strain of maintaining her job at the bakery while participating in the program, the constant feeling of being one step behind everyone else. "This was a mistake," she whispered to the empty That evening, her phone rang as she was helping Eli with his science project. Harrington's name flashed on the screen. "I'm calling about your presentation today," he said, without preamble, when she answered. Amara closed her eyes, preparing for gentle "I know it was terrible. I'm sorry I wasted your..." "The first investor I ever pitched laughed in my face," Harrington literally stood up in the middle of my presentation and walked out laughing, said my concept was the most ridiculous thing he'd ever heard. The unexpected confession startled her into silence. 2 years later, that same restaurant concept won Best New Restaurant in 3 national publications, he continued. "The point is, presentations fail, ideas evolve. The only true failure is abandoning your vision because of one bad day." After the call, Amara sat at the kitchen table long after Eli had gone to bed. On a blank page, she began to draw, not just the layout of Remembrance, but the feeling of it, the warm light spilling onto the sidewalk, the handwritten stories framed on the walls, the communal table where strangers might share not just food, but conversation. In the margins, she wrote, "Not just about food, about memory, dignity, and giving people what I was once denied, a seat at the table." The words felt right, true. The next morning, she arrived at the program with renewed determination. If she couldn't match the others' polish, she would leverage what she did have, authentic connection to her food and its purpose. As the program entered its final phase, participants focused on refining their business plans and preparing for the culminating event, a showcase where they would present to potential investors, industry leaders, and press. The stakes were enormous. Several participants from previous cohorts had secured substantial funding at similar events. Amara worked tirelessly, consulting with mentors, revising her financial projections, developing a comprehensive business plan. The concept of Remembrance became more defined, a cafe rooted in community, memory, and dignity, with a sustainable business model that balanced profit with purpose. One evening, as she worked late in the test kitchen developing a new recipe, she discovered her notebook missing, the one containing her latest concept refinements, including the quote about memory and dignity that had become Remembrance's unofficial motto. She searched everywhere, retracing her steps through the building, but the notebook was gone. Frustrated but too tired to worry further, she recreated her notes from memory and continued working. 2 days later, during a group session, where participants shared their progress, Lucas unveiled the latest iteration of his concept. As he spoke, Amara felt a chill of recognition. Heritage had evolved significantly, now featuring community storytelling, intergenerational cooking classes, and a mission focused on preserving cultural memory through food. After all, Lucas concluded smoothly, our concept isn't just about food, it's about memory, dignity, and giving people what society often denies them, a seat at the table where their stories matter. The words, her words, hung in the air. Several participants glanced between Lucas and Amara, registering the similarity. Lucas met her gaze with cool challenge, daring her to say something. Anger and betrayal flashed through her, hot and immediate. The notebook hadn't been misplaced, it had been taken. Her vision, born from her grandmother's kitchen from years of dreaming, had been appropriated by someone with the resources and connections to realize it before she could. That night, she couldn't sleep. The apartment felt too small, too warm despite the autumn chill outside. She slipped out onto the fire escape, where the city stretched before her in a tapestry of lights. Far below, late-night pedestrians moved like ants, each carrying their own dreams and disappointments. She could confront Lucas, but to what end? His connections within the industry far outweighed hers. She could appeal to Harrington, but without proof, it would be her word against Lucas's, and complaining would only reinforce the perception that she didn't belong. For a moment, the temptation to walk away resurged. Let Lucas have the concept, let someone with resources bring it to life, even if not in the way she had envisioned. But as the thought formed, she rejected it. This vision wasn't just about business, it was her heritage, her grandmother's legacy. To abandon it would be a betrayal of something deeper than ambition. The next morning, Amara requested a meeting with Harrington. In his office, with its panoramic view of the city, she laid out her dilemma. I can't prove he took my notebook, she concluded, but I know my own words, my own concept. Harrington listened without interruption, his expression. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. What would you like me to do? He asked finally. The question surprised her. She had expected advice, perhaps, or reassurance, not an invitation to propose a solution. She hesitated, then straightened her shoulders. I'd like one more chance to present, at the showcase. Not just a presentation, but a demonstration. I want to cook, to serve, to show rather than tell what remembrance means. Harrington studied her, then nodded slowly. The showcase format is already set, but we could arrange a special presentation. You'd have to be prepared for significant scrutiny. I am, Amara said, more confident than she felt. The day of the showcase arrived with crisp autumn sunshine filtering through the warehouse windows. The space had been transformed into an elegant venue, with each participant assigned a booth where they could present their concepts to rotating groups of investors and industry leaders. Lucas's booth was particularly impressive, with professional signage, a digital display showing renderings of heritage, and elegant food samples prepared by a team he had hired for the occasion. He moved through the crowd with easy charm, clearly in his element. Amara's booth was simpler. Handwritten story cards displayed on a reclaimed wood table, photographs of her grandmother and the community meals they had hosted, samples of her cinnamon rolls and sourdough. But what her display lacked in polish, it made up for in authenticity. As the event progressed, Amara was surprised by the interest her concept generated. Investors asked thoughtful questions, genuinely engaged with her vision. One elderly investor spent nearly 20 minutes sharing his own food memories, tearing up as he described his mother's pierogi. Midway through the showcase, Harrington stepped onto the small stage at the front of the room, tapping a microphone for attention. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special presentation today. One of our participants has requested the opportunity to demonstrate her concept in a more immersive way. He gestured toward the test kitchen, now set with a single long table. I invite you all to experience remembrance. Ms. Amara, curious murmurs as attendees. Amara took a deep breath, centering. This was it. Her moment to reclaim her vision, to show rather than argue its value. As people gathered, she began to cook, not with showy technique or elaborate presentation, but with the quiet confidence of someone who speaks through food. She served a simple meal, her grandmother's cinnamon bread, a fragrant soup that had been simmering since morning, roasted vegetables with herbs from the program's garden. But what made the presentation unique were the handwritten cards tucked beneath each plate, each containing a food memory contributed by program staff and participants over the past weeks. As guests discovered the cards, Conversations bloomed around the table, strangers sharing stories of family meals, childhood treats, the dishes that reminded them of home. Amara moved around the table, refilling glasses, adding a sprig of herbs here, a drizzle of sauce there. When everyone had been served, she stood at the head of the table and spoke. "Food has always been how my family shows love." Her voice soft but clear. "My grandmother couldn't bring much when she immigrated, but she brought her recipe, the taste of home. She taught me that cooking isn't just about feeding bodies, it's about nourishing souls." She gestured to the table before her. "This is what Remembrance will be. Not just a cafe, but a community. A place where food tells stories, where everyone has a seat at the table, where the simple act of breaking bread together reminds us of our shared humanity." She spoke of growing up translating her grandmother's recipes, of the community meals they hosted even when money was tight, of her belief that true hospitality meant everyone was served with the same dignity. "My cafe isn't just about food," she concluded, her gaze finding Lucas in the crowd. "It's about memory, dignity, and giving people what I was once denied, a seat at the table, not because they can afford it, not because they look or speak a certain way, but because they are human, and that is enough." The room fell silent for a beat, then erupted in applause. People stood, some wiping away tears, others nodding in recognition of a truth that transcended business plans and profit margin. In that moment, surrounded by strangers moved by her vision, Amara felt a shift, a certainty that regardless of what came next, she had honored her grandmother's legacy. She had spoken her. As the applause faded and guests returned to mingling, Harrington approached, accompanied by several investors. "That," he said quietly, "is what breaking bread is meant to discover." He turned to the investors. "Wouldn't you agree?" A woman in a tailored suit stepped forward. "Ms. Chen, I represent the Westfield Foundation. We're very interested in discussing funding options for Remembrance." Others joined the conversation, offering cards, suggesting meetings. Amara accepted them in a daze, the reality of the moment not quite sinking. From across the room, she caught Lucas watching, his expression unreadable. Their eyes met briefly before he turned away, disappearing into the crowd. The showcase concluded with Harrington announcing a special investment opportunity, full funding for one participant's concept selected by him personally. The room hushed as he took the stage again. "The purpose of Breaking Bread has always been to discover not just viable businesses, but visionary leaders who understand that food is about connection," he said. Today, one presentation embodied that philosophy completely. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room before landing on Amara. "Ms. Chen, I would like to offer full funding for Remembrance under the Harrington Ventures portfolio." The crowd applauded as Amara made her way to the stage, stunned by the turn of events. Standing beside Harrington, looking out at the sea of approving faces, she should have felt triumphant. Instead, she felt a strange hollowness. Remembrance had always been about independence, about creating something authentic, rooted in her community rather than imposed from outside. To accept Harrington's offer would mean joining his empire, becoming another success story in his portfolio. She glanced at Harrington, at his expectant smile, at the cameras poised to capture the moment. Then she looked beyond him, to the window where the city spread out below. Her city, with its struggling neighborhoods and resilient communities, the places where her grandmother had first shared her recipe. Taking a deep breath, Amara smiled and said, "Thank you for this incredible honor, but I'm going to have to decline." A murmur of surprise rippled through the audience. Harrington's eyebrows rose, but there was something like respect in his expression. "Not out of pride," she clarified quickly, "but because Remembrance needs to be rooted in the community it serves, built from the ground up rather than imposed from above." She turned to address the room at large. "I'm incredibly grateful for everything this program has taught me, for Mr. Harrington's belief in my vision. But Remembrance has to belong to the neighborhood first, to the people whose stories it will tell." Silence. Then, unexpectedly, applause scattered at. Harrington studied her for a long moment, a thoughtful. Later, as the event wound down and participants exchanged final business cards and congratulations, Harrington found Amara gathering her materials. "That was unexpected." "I'm sorry if I embarrassed you," Amara replied, carefully wrapping a photograph of her grandmother. "I'm truly grateful for the opportunity. You didn't embarrass me. You impressed me. Few people turn down that kind of offer, especially when standing on a stage with cameras running." He handed her a business card, not the glossy corporate one she'd seen him distribute to others, but a simple cream card with just his name and a phone number. "When you're ready to move forward with Remembrance, your way, call me. Not as your primary investor, but as an ally. Sometimes having the right introduction at the right moment makes all the difference. Over the following months, Amara worked methodically toward her goal. She kept her job at the Moonrise Bakery but reduced her hours, using the extra time to develop a detailed business plan. The connections she'd made during the program proved invaluable. An attorney offered to handle her incorporation paperwork pro bono. A real estate agent, specializing in small businesses, helped her scout locations. She applied for a municipal cultural grant, emphasizing Remembrance's community programming. To her surprise, the application was approved, providing seed money for initial renovations and equipment. She supplemented this by selling small batch pastries at weekend farmers' markets, building a loyal customer base and testing recipes. Harrington helped too, though not in the way she had expected. Rather than offering funding, he provided connections, introducing her to a sustainable building materials supplier, arranging meetings with small business lenders who understood her vision, connecting her with a retired chef who became an informal mentor. He offered guidance without control, support without strings. When the vacant storefront she had admired months earlier came on the market, Amara didn't hesitate. The space needed work, extensive plumbing repairs, electrical updates, a complete kitchen build-out. But she could see Remembrance in its bones. The large windows that would fill the space with morning light, the built-in shelves that would display community cookbooks, the small counter that would become the heart of her operation. The renovation process was challenging, filled with unexpected setbacks and budget constraints. There were days when Amara questioned her decision to decline Harrington's offer, when the freedom of building Remembrance her way seemed overshadowed by the struggle of doing so with limited resources. Eli proved invaluable during this period, spending weekends helping with painting and construction, creating social media accounts to document the cafe's progress, even designing a simple logo, a stylized bread loaf with the word Remembrance curved above it like rising steam. The community rallied around the project too. Neighbors stopped by to check on progress, sometimes bringing coffee or sandwiches for the workers. A local carpenter offered to build the communal table at cost. A retired teacher volunteered to coordinate the intergenerational baking program Amara had envisioned. 6 months after the Breaking Bread showcase, Remembrance was ready to open. The space had been transformed into a warm, inviting cafe with earth-toned walls, mismatched vintage chairs, and the promised communal table dominating the center of the room. Photographs of local elders alongside their recipes lined one wall, while another featured empty frames waiting for the food memories customers would contribute. The menu was simple but intentional. Her grandmother's cinnamon rolls and sourdough formed the foundation, supplemented by seasonal soups, sandwiches, and baked goods. Each table featured a small herb plant with a name card, rosemary, basil, thyme, creating a living element that required care and attention, much like the community the cafe hoped to nurture. On opening day, Amara arrived before dawn, just as she had done at the Moonrise for years, but this time she unlocked her own door, turned on her own lights, fired up her own ovens. As the scent of cinnamon and cardamom filled the space, she felt her grandmother's presence acutely. The lessons passed down through recipes now finding new expression. By the time Eli arrived to help with final preparations, a line had already formed outside. The first customers entered at precisely 7 a.m., a mix of neighbors, former Breaking Bread participants, and strangers drawn by the scent of fresh bread. Harrington arrived mid-morning, declining Amara's offer of a special table, instead taking a seat at the communal one, where he engaged in conversation with an elderly woman about her contribution to the recipe wall. He ordered a simple tea and cinnamon roll, leaving a generous tip and a handwritten note. This is exactly what Breaking Bread was meant to discover. Congratulations. The day passed in a blur of activity, taking orders, explaining the concept to curious customers, refilling the pastry case as items sold out faster than anticipated. By closing time, Amara was exhausted but exhilarated. Remembrance had come to life exactly as she had envisioned. Not perfect, not polished, but authentic and alive. As she wiped down tables and straightened chairs, the bell above the door jingled. Looking up, she was surprised to see Lucas Blackwood standing in the entryway, surveying the space with an unreadable expression. "We're closed," more sharply than intended. "I know." He remained in the doorway, seemingly uncertain, a stark contrast to his usual confidence. "I just wanted to see what you created." Amara hesitated, then gestured for him to enter. "Look around if you want." Lucas moved through the space slowly, taking in the recipe wall, the herb-named tables, the communal center where crumbs and coffee rings evidenced the day's conversations. He stopped before a framed quote, her grandmother's words about dignity being served before the first bite. "It's good," he said finally, his tone neutral but not unkind. "Different than what I expected, but good." "What did you expect?" Amara asked, curious despite herself. Lucas shrugged. "Something smaller, I guess. Less cohesive." He turned to face her. "Heritage opens next month, downtown, near the theater district." "I know, I saw the announcement." An awkward silence stretched between them. Finally, Lucas reached into his pocket and placed a folded bill on the counter. "For the cinnamon roll in the case." Amara wrapped the pastry carefully, handing it without taking them. "On the house." Their eyes met briefly, a flicker of understanding passing between them. Not friendship, not forgiveness exactly, but recognition. Without another word, Lucas nodded, took the pastry, and left, the bell jingling in his wake. He left the money on the counter. He never returned. As the weeks passed, remembrance found its mornings brought commuters seeking coffee and pastries to go. Middays filled with remote workers and retirees lingering over lunch. Afternoons saw students claiming tables for study sessions, often staying. The Sunday community dinners quickly became popular, operating on a genuine pay-what-you-can model that somehow balanced itself naturally. Those who could afford more did, allowing others to participate regardless of financial circumstance. The cafe wasn't just financially sustainable, it was flourishing. Within 3 months, Amara hired 2 part-time employees, a high school student interested in culinary arts and a retired baker who missed the rhythm of early mornings in a kitchen. By 6 months, she had expanded the menu and begun wholesaling her sourdough to local restaurants. Eli thrived too, taking on more responsibility at the cafe while maintaining his grades. His asthma improved with access to better health care now that Amara could afford comprehensive insurance. He grew not just physically, but in confidence, proudly giving tours to first-time customers, explaining the concept behind each element of remembrance. Harrington visited often, sometimes with potential collaborators, other times alone with his laptop, claiming a corner table for hours. He never interfered with operations or offered unsolicited advice, simply observed with quiet satisfaction as Remembrance became exactly what Amara had envisioned, a place where food and community intersected. One rainy afternoon, almost a year after Remembrance opened, Amara looked up from the register to see a young woman standing in the doorway, soaked from the downpour. She was perhaps 20, with worn clothes and a backpack clutched protectively against her. The same uncertainty Amara had once felt was written across her face, the hesitation of someone unsure if they belonged in the warmth while dripping rainwater on the floor. Conversations continued around her, customers absorbed in their own worlds, not noticing the newcomer who remained frozen at the threshold. But Amara noticed. She always noticed. Setting aside the receipts she'd been organizing, she moved from behind the counter and approached the young woman with a warm smile. From the pastry case, she selected a freshly baked cinnamon roll, wrapping it carefully in paper. "It's warm," she said, extending the package. "So are you. You just forgot." The young woman blinked in surprise, then slowly reached for the offering. As their hands briefly touched in the exchange, Amara felt the circle complete, from her grandmother to her, from her to this stranger. The simple act of recognizing another's humanity rippling outward like waves from a stone dropped in still water. "There's a seat for you at the communal table," Amara added, gesturing to the center of the room. "Join us when you're ready." As the young woman found her place at the table, gradually relaxing as conversations included her, Amara returned to her work behind the counter. Through the window, she could see the rain still falling, blurring the edges of the city just as it had on that fateful day when she'd made a simple choice that changed everything. What had begun with a soaked umbrella and leftover bread had become something no business plan could fully capture. A life transformed not by wealth or luck, but by quiet bravery, earned trust, and the decision to never stop showing up, even when no one was watching. The true success of Remembrance wasn't measured in profit margins or positive reviews, though it had both in abundance. Its success lived in moments like this, when strangers became neighbors, when food became connection, when dignity was served alongside nourishment. The seasonal changes brought new rhythms to Remembrance. Summer brought outdoor seating, potted herbs flourishing in the sunlight, children stopping by after school for frozen lemonade made with their grandmother's recipe. Fall brought warming spices, harvest celebrations, and hearty soups that steamed the windows on chilly evenings. Winter transformed the cafe into a haven from the cold, with reading nooks and knitting circles gathering around the communal table. As Remembrance approached its second anniversary, Amara faced an unexpected opportunity. A developer had purchased the building next door and offered to buy her out at twice the market value. The letter sat unopened on her desk for days, the possibility of financial security tempting after years of careful budgeting. But Remembrance had never been primarily about profit. The cafe had become a neighborhood anchor, hosting literacy classes in the mornings before opening, providing kitchen space for immigrant entrepreneurs, testing recipes, creating jobs for local youth. The financial offer, generous as it was, couldn't account for the intangible value of what had been built. Amara declined the offer with a handwritten note, inviting the developer to stop by for coffee instead. To her surprise, he did. A stern-faced man in an expensive suit who arrived skeptical and left 2 hours later, having shared stories of his own grandmother's cooking. He never mentioned the offer again, but 6 months later, when Amara mentioned her dream of expanding the community meal program, an anonymous donation arrived that covered the exact amount needed. Lucas Blackwood's Heritage Restaurant opened to critical acclaim, earning a coveted spot on a national Best New Restaurants. Amara read the reviews with a complex mixture of emotions, pride for the elements that truly were his, recognition of the parts inspired by her concept, and a certain peace about how differently their paths had unfolded. Heritage catered to the city's elite, with reservations nearly impossible to secure and a price point that made it a special occasion destination. Remembrance remained accessible, a daily touchpoint in people's lives rather than a rare experience. Both had their place in the ecosystem's food culture. The young woman from the rainy day, Zoe, became a regular, first as a customer, lingering over a single tea for hours, then as a volunteer, helping with community dinners, eventually as Remembrance's third employee. Her story emerged in fragments, leaving an abusive relationship, couch surfing with friends until those options ran out, nearly giving up, before finding a place where she was seen not for her circumstances, but for her humanity. "You changed my life," as they prepared for us. "No," Amara corrected gently. "You changed your life. I just held the door open." 3 years after opening, Remembrance faced its first major crisis when a burst pipe flooded the kitchen overnight, destroying equipment and ruining inventory. Insurance would cover some costs, but the cafe would need to close for repairs, meaning no income for weeks, possibly months. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. By noon, a makeshift command center had formed in the dining area, with customers volunteering skills and resources. A local plumber offered emergency services at cost. A competing cafe offered their kitchen during off hours so Amara could fulfill wholesale orders. Neighbors organized a fundraiser that covered expenses the insurance wouldn't. During the 3 weeks Remembrance was closed, Amara and her staff took the community dinners mobile, using church kitchens and community centers to continue serving meals. When the cafe reopened, the line stretched around the block, not just regulars, but people from across the city who had heard the story and wanted to support what Remembrance represented. Harrington was there too, though not as a benefactor riding to the rescue. He simply waited in line like everyone else, paid for his cinnamon roll, and said, "Some businesses inspire customers, rare ones inspire community. You've built the latter." The 4th year brought expansion, not of the physical space, which remained intentionally intimate, but of Remembrance's impact. Amara published a cookbook featuring recipes from the cafe alongside stories contributed by customers. She launched a small scholarship program for local students pursuing culinary education, funded by a portion of cookbook proceeds. Eli graduated high school with honors and a culinary school acceptance, though he decided to defer for a year to continue working at Remembrance. "I want to understand the business side more deeply," he explained. "Before I learn classical techniques, I want to master what makes people return to a place, not just a plate." The 5th anniversary celebration was not a gala event, but a block party. Streets closed to traffic, tables stretching end to end, food contributed by neighbors, music performed by local artists. Harrington attended without fanfare, helping to set up tables and staying to clean up afterward. As sunset painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, Amara found a quiet moment to slip away, climbing the fire escape to the roof of the building. From there, she could see the entire celebration spread below. Children playing, elders sharing stories, strangers becoming friends over shared. She thought of her grandmother, who had crossed oceans with nothing but recipes and determination. She thought of her parents, who had worked tirelessly to give their children opportunities they never had. She thought of the man beneath the awning on that rainy night who had reminded her that dignity is perhaps the most essential nourishment of all. A light footstep behind her announced Harrington's presence. He joined her at the edge, gazing out over the celebration. 5 years. Quite an achievement. Amara smiled. Different than what you imagined when you offered funding, I imagine. Better. Much better. They stood in companionable silence, watching as someone began a spontaneous dance, others quickly joining in. You know, Harrington said thoughtfully, when I started Breaking Bread, I thought I was creating a pipeline for the next generation of restaurant moguls. But what you've shown me, what remembrance represents, is something more fundamental. It's about creating spaces where people remember their connection to each other. He turned to face her. The program has evolved because of you. We now emphasize community impact alongside financial viability. We prioritize applicants with visions that extend beyond profit margins. I'm glad, Amara said softly. I'm retiring next year. Harrington, stepping back from day-to-day operations at Culinary Ventures. I'd like you to consider taking over Breaking Bread, shaping it according to your vision. The offer stunned her. Me? But I'm not. Not what? Not polished enough? Not connected enough? He shook his head. You're exactly what the program needs. Someone who understands that true success in the culinary world isn't measured by Michelin stars or investor returns, but by the lives changed through the simple act of breaking bread together. Below them, the party continued, a testament to what one small cafe could mean to a community. Children raced between tables. Elderly neighbors taught younger ones traditional dances. The communal tables that had begun in remembrance had expanded to fill the entire street. I'll think about it. Later that night, after the streets had been cleared and the cafe locked up, Amara sat at the communal table with Eli, Zoe, and the rest of the staff, sharing a final piece of anniversary cake. Remember when you used to bring home day-old cinnamon rolls from the moonrise? Eli asked, a nostalgic smile playing on his lips. At 20 now, he had their father's height and their mother's expressive eyes. You'd devour them like you hadn't eaten in days. I still do, he admitted, reaching for another forkful of cake. To think all this started because you gave away leftover bread on a rainy night, Zoe mused. Amara shook her head. It started long before that, with my grandmother teaching me that food is memory made tangible, with my parents showing me that generosity isn't dependent on abundance, with a community that believed in the vision of a place where everyone belongs. She looked around at the cafe that had become so much more than a business, at the walls covered with stories, the tables that had hosted countless conversations, the kitchen where traditions were preserved and reimagined daily. Remembrance was never just mine to build. It belongs to everyone who has ever shared a meal here, contributed a story, found connection at these tables. The next morning, before dawn, Amara unlocked the cafe doors just as she had done thousands of times before. The ritual remained the same. Lights on, ovens warming, dough that had been rising overnight ready to be shaped. The scent of yeast and possibility filled the air. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the windows, illuminating the empty cafe in a golden glow, she thought of Harrington's offer. To shape Breaking Bread would mean extending Remembrance's philosophy beyond these walls, influencing a new generation of food entrepreneurs to see their work as community building rather than mere commerce. She would accept, she decided, but on her own terms, teaching from this very space, bringing participants into the daily rhythm of remembrance, showing rather than telling what it means to create a business with soul at its center. The bell above the door jingled, startling her from her thoughts. It was early, an hour before opening, but standing in the doorway was a middle-aged man in a business, clearly uncomfortable and out of place. We're not open yet, Amara began, then paused, noticing his expression, a mixture of determination and vulnerability she recognized all too well. I know, his voice strained. I lost my job yesterday, 20 years at the same company, and suddenly he trailed off, looking embarrassed. I saw your lights on. I've passed this place 100 times, but never stopped. I don't know why I'm here now. Amara wiped her hands on her apron and gestured to the communal table. I could use some company while these rolls bake. Coffee? Relief washed over his face as he nodded. Thank you. As she poured 2 cups, she noticed he was staring at the wall of food memories, reading the stories of strangers who had become part of Remembrance's extended family. My father lost his job when I was 14, setting a steaming mug before him. It changed everything for our family, but he used to say that sometimes what looks like an ending is actually a door opening to something you couldn't have imagined. The man looked up, meeting her gaze with tentative hope. Did he find something better? Eventually, she nodded. But more importantly, he found something that mattered to him in a different way, something that used parts of himself he'd never had the chance to develop. She rose to check the ovens, the familiar scent of cinnamon and cardamom filling the space. Minutes later, she returned with a warm roll on a plate, setting it before him without ceremony. "So are you? You just forgot." His eyes widened slightly at the echo of something he'd needed to hear, though he couldn't have named it. As he took the first bite, his shoulders relaxed slightly. By the time Eli arrived to help with opening preparations, the man was sharing his background in operations management, his dreams of working with sustainable food systems, his uncertainty about starting over in his 50s. Amara smiled to herself as she returned to the kitchen. This was Remembrance's true purpose, not just serving food, but creating a space where people could remember their own worth, their own capabilities, their connection to others. As she shaped dough for the day's bread, she thought of all the lives that had intersected in this space. The elderly woman who found purpose teaching children to bake, the immigrant family who hosted their first American Thanksgiving at the communal table, the young couple who met during a community dinner and later held their wedding reception in the cafe. What had begun as a simple act of kindness on a rainy night had rippled outward, touching lives in ways she could never have anticipated. The true legacy of Remembrance wasn't in its recipes or its reputation, but in these countless moments of connection, proof that even in a world that often prioritizes transaction over relation, there remained an unquenchable hunger for genuine. Outside, the city was awakening, morning light painting the buildings in shades of possibility. Inside, Amara continued the work she had been preparing for her entire life, creating a place where everyone had a seat at the table, where food told stories, where the simple act of breaking bread together reminded us of our shared humanity. If you passed by Remembrance on any given day, you might notice nothing extraordinary, just a small cafe with warm lights and mismatched chairs, the scent of cinnamon and cardamom drifting through an open door. But if you stepped inside, you'd discover what Amara had always known, that the simplest gestures can contain the most profound truths. That kindness offered without expectation creates ripples beyond imagination, and that sometimes the most important thing we can offer another person is not advice or opportunity or even food, but recognition of their essential humanity. And in a world that moves too quickly, that sees too little, that forgets too easily, such recognition might be the greatest gift of all.